Warm apple pie. Warm apple pie with a hint of vanilla, a kind of pie a la mode. In what was perhaps the most magical moment of my life, this amazing smell kept my senses, primarily my sense of touch, at bay. Remarkably, however, Angela and I didn't go to the prom or any of the other weekend events everyone plans for the occasion. I approached her from behind in line at the movie theater and she smiled shyly. I smiled back at her and we both laughed. While almost everyone else at Comac South High School was at prom, we two misfits walked unaccompanied into the movie theater on a beautiful May evening in 1974. Angela and I had known each other since my family had moved to town 5 years earlier. Officially, I am Nicholas Trzynczynarski, and since both of our last names began with a T, I often sat right behind Angela in the few classes we attended together over the years. During that time, we went from mere acquaintances to pretty good friends, and whatever we called it. Anyway, she was my first and I was hers. It is said that the clerks at Ellis Island abbreviated the names of many immigrants when they came to the United States, because they couldn't pronounce or understand them. If that's true, I don't even want to know what my real last name is. I always felt like I should get 100 points on all spelling tests just for pronouncing my last name correctly. Maybe that's why I'm Nicky to my family, but to everyone else who's important in my life, and even those who aren't, I just call myself Trick. Except for Angela. To her, I've always been Nicholas, pronouncing all three syllables rather than blending. It was easy to realize that Angela didn't think too highly of me the first year my family lived in town. I was a skinny 7th grader with a bunch of dark brown unruly hair. Depending on who you talked to, I was considered either a quirky genius or a lazy slacker, and probably both were true to one degree or another. I could get great grades if I wanted to, but I rarely had the opportunity. I was bored to tears in school, and my competitive fervor dulled when I learned how many kids cheated to get good grades. Most of the time, I just showed up to school, kept my mouth shut, and was one of many nameless kids. Angela, on the other hand, was almost my polar opposite. She was incredibly smart, probably the smartest kid in our class, and competed like no one else I had ever met. She was tireless and never let anyone hold her back. She barely tolerated the younger ones asking questions of the teachers, probably because she thought they were interfering with her learning. At that period of her life, she was also not known for her tact and was very straightforward with everyone. Someone must have once explained to her what tact was, and at least forced her to be tolerant. No one wondered why she had few friends. Angela was a force to be reckoned with, not only in the classroom, but physically as well. In 7th grade, her height was 5'8", and she towered over almost every other girl in our class. In comparison, my height was 4'11", and my weight was 68 pounds. Perhaps it was due to the fact that young womanhood had not yet knocked on my door. I had 2 lessons with Angela in 7th grade, and I'm willing to bet she didn't say more than a dozen words to me all year. This was pretty typical for me since I was new to the school and hardly anyone talked to me. In 8th grade, my social life took off, but my relationship with Angela remained consistently cool. Then in 9th grade, she occasionally had a few words with me. I was fine with both because, by this point, I had a few good friends and a small social life, but as far as dating went, well, Angela wasn't dating anyone, because I don't think there was a single guy in our school who had the courage to ask her out. There were rumors in the hallways that she was a lesbian, and that was not a good thing in the 1970s. Long Island was a mecca for Italian girls, and in 9th grade I could only look up to Jennifer Armaroli, a dark-skinned Southern Italian who had the biggest legs on earth and wore short skirts with bare tights to show them off. To quote Bob Seger, she was a black-haired beauty with big dark eyes and her own glasses sitting high, very tight and high. My love was only at a distance because I never had the courage to ask her out. Between freshman and sophomore year, biology smiled on me, and over the summer I grew 5 inches, reaching a height of 5'7" 1/2 and a weight of 116 pounds. It was as if the whole world had rediscovered itself to me, and girls who hadn't paid attention to me before suddenly realized I was alive. Yes, I still had a mop of long, unruly hair, but I was now taller than many of the girls who used to look down on me. Literally. Maybe because we were seeing eye to eye now, Angela seemed much friendlier to me. We had several deep conversations, and I began to realize that she wasn't an automaton without feelings. In fact, she had quite a few feelings, and I got the feeling that there was a real girl living somewhere inside just waiting to break free. I tried to talk to her and to her. Of course, she was still the determined Angela, but I was able to see a part of her that I don't think many others saw. A few times we even sat together at lunch and talked. I learned that she wanted to become a heart surgeon and was going to study at Cornell to make it happen. And me? I was going to be a cab driver. No, I'm kidding. I wanted to be a sports journalist and I was going to go to the University of Missouri. She told me that she thought I could do better in life, noting how well I did on state tests and things like that, where everyone was on an equal footing. She pointed out that my scores weren't much lower than hers, especially since I didn't spend my precious time studying. We became such good friends that I took her snide comments as an attempt to push me to do something more. Somewhere along the line, she eventually succeeded, because I enrolled at Marist College as a transfer student. By my junior year of high school, I was fluent in French and knew all 6 tenses, which is pretty good since most French people only know 4. Italian turned out to be not much more difficult for me. Although Angela didn't have many friends, she was on many committees and participated in many activities throughout her high school years. When one of these groups had a special cause, I was often her companion. Although we were not a couple, it drew looks from our peers. In high school, Angela had very infrequent dates. Not that I had many, but I had more of them than she did. My senior year of high school, I asked a girl I liked but hadn't dated yet to prom, and she turned me down. I was disappointed, but not crushed. A few of my friends tried to talk me into taking another friend who really wanted to be at prom, but she wasn't invited. But my heart didn't lie to that, so I told them I wasn't going with anyone. That's how I ended up at the movie theater alone at the prom. Angela and I watched a movie together, and when it ended, it was 11, and I asked if she wanted to have a beer with me. At the time, it was 18 in New York City for drinking alcohol, and there was a bar in town that I had been a regular at since I turned 18, and that's where I took her. I don't think she'd ever had a beer, judging by the look on her face during the first few sips. But she took it like a trooper and drank her half of the pitcher I'd bought. We just talked like normal people, although I noticed she was a little tipsy as she started giggling and stumbling over some words. We sat 1-2 at a table of 4, and for some reason I felt like she was getting closer and closer to me as we talked. I decided that 1 pitcher was enough for the day since I was driving, and after paying the waitress, we both got up to leave. At this point, we were practically standing on top of each other, and I'm not quite sure what possessed me, but I leaned over and kissed her. The next moment, I moved the car to a dark spot at the back of the parking lot, and we both settled into the big, comfy back seat. Again, I didn't quite get it, but we drove on. Once again, we talked about general things without confessing our boundless love for each other. I think we both realized that this was one of life's happy moments, and were smart enough to enjoy it. I turned off the engine and pulled up next to her father's car in the parking lot of the movie theater. Before she could open her car door, I pulled her to me, looked her straight in the eye, and said, "Thank you for the gift of you. I will treasure it forever." I realized I had stunned her, and believe me, stunning Angela Tallarico was not easy. Her big eyes widened, but she didn't say anything. Then she got out of the car, got into her automobile, and drove away. I never told anyone about that night, and I don't think she did either. I didn't feel like our friendship had changed one bit because of it. For the next few weeks, I thought about that night every day. I knew I didn't love her. I knew she didn't love me. But there was something about her, and I had to see that if I lit a spark in her, it would turn into a flame. The week before graduation, I asked her out on a date that was supposed to be the week after graduation. She gently turned me down, but it hit me. I knew she could tell she hurt me because I'm sure my mouth was open and tears were in my eyes. At 18, most teenagers think they know everything. I, on the other hand, obviously knew nothing. I was shocked. Sure enough, Angela became valedictorian of the class and, naturally, gave a speech at graduation the following week. I hadn't heard a word of it, nor had I heard any of the other speeches or announcements. I sat next to the class clown, and Mike Lips Laskowitz kept the dialogue going throughout the ceremony. I only laughed out loud a few times and had a smile on my face the entire time. The ceremony lasted over an hour, and when it was over, my mom asked me why I was the only one who seemed to enjoy the entire ceremony. She knew Lips, and when I pointed out that he was sitting next to me, she said she understood perfectly. "Your father isn't as funny as this guy. God, what dry speeches," she remarked. During the summer, I worked at the local library and played softball with a group of high school kids. We had a pretty good team, and it wasn't a bad group of guys. We often had drinks after the games, most of which we won. In early August, some of us were leaving for school, so we scheduled one last game for the whole team and had a closing party for the guys on the team and our girlfriends and cheerleaders. The game was scheduled for late afternoon, and the party was in a friend's big backyard around 8 o'clock. We beat the team from neighboring Deer Park 11-0, so everyone was excited for the farewell party. When I got there, the party had already been going on for about 10 minutes. I quickly grabbed a beer and walked around the courtyard, grabbing a snack and saying hello to everyone. Lori Yarnevstein, the girl who turned me down at graduation, was there. And as I approached the small group of people she was with, she turned to me, smiled brightly, and then just kissed me. Lori and I had been friends all through high school, and I always wanted more, but I didn't work up the courage to ask her out until just before graduation. She never gave me a reason for rejection, but I found out from my friends who went to prom that she didn't go either. So it wasn't like I was rejected because of someone else. Lori had shoulder-length golden blonde hair, bright blue eyes, and according to a lot of the guys at Comac South, she was just beautiful. I spent the next hour with her. Then a disapproving voice came from behind my right shoulder. "Sorry, Lori, but you're sitting in my seat," Angela said, looking at Lori and me. We raised our heads at the same time. Angela was looking at us through the frames of her glasses. My mouth opened, but no sound came out of it. Lori, stammering, saw the shocked look on my face, quietly got up from the table and walked over to the other group. Just as quietly, Angela moved to the seat Lori had just vacated and just as naturally put her right arm around me. The conversation, which had been abruptly interrupted when Angela approached the table, resumed as if nothing had happened. "You owe me," she whispered in my ear, "and I intend to collect the debt tonight." I know I blushed 3 shades of red. At the sight of Angela and I, many people looked in our direction with surprised expressions on their faces. I tried my best not to look surprised either. At the end of the evening, several couples were making plans to go bar hopping. When I glanced over at Angela, she was already halfway to my car and beckoning me to follow her. "Ah, looks like we have other plans," I said to my best friend Danny and his girlfriend. "Ah, gotta go. Do you think you can find us a quiet place to park?" she asked in a half-whisper as I watched the lights of the backyard reflect in her dark eyes. "Oh yeah," I murmured, leading her to my car and opening the passenger side door in front of her. 5 minutes later, I brought us to a nice quiet place and we got down to business. "Why?" I finally asked quietly. "Why did you turn me down for a date before? I thought we had something going on." "We did have something, and it was freaking me out. I didn't know how to deal with it," she replied. "Look, Nicholas, you know that I've already chosen my path in life, and we both know that long-distance relationships in college never end. I didn't want to start something with you only to have it fall apart 6 months later and you hate me. I really value your friendship and I don't want to lose it. I don't have many friends and I really can't lose them. So if we just stay friends, okay, I understand. But why tonight specifically? And what was that nonsense with Lori? Considering she refused to ask you to prom, I felt she had no right to you and I wanted to make sure you came with me tonight. I wanted to send you to college the right way. But it worked out just fine. Where did you learn everything else? It was wonderful. She purred. Believe it or not, I learned it from reading Penthouse and Playboy, I said. There's a lot more to these magazines than pictures of naked women. There are words in between those pictures. Huh, who would have thought it? That should make you very popular in college, she said. After we got dressed and cleaned up, I drove Angela home. I walked to the passenger side of the car, opened the door for her and helped her out. Goodbye, Dr. Tallarico, I said in my most somber tone. If you ever have any free time at Cornell, why don't you send an old friend a letter? I reached into my car, pulled out a pen and a piece of paper, and scribbled down my college address. Goodbye, Nicholas, she said, put my address in the pocket of her shorts, turned, and walked into her house. About a month later, I received a letter from Angela telling me about all the interesting things she was doing. About a week later, I wrote back describing my life. A month after that, I received a second letter, which I also replied to, but that was the last letter I was to receive. I realized what she was getting at. I hoped that someday I would just be a pleasant memory to her. Next chapter. Like I said, I've never dated just for quantity. I don't have that kind of ego. I also don't think I need to date the prettiest girls, at least not the prettiest ones. Yes, it's a bonus if a woman is as beautiful on the outside as she is on the inside, but I do look for inner beauty. But now I'm back to whining about Angela. The classes were interesting, to say the least. Since I was already fluent in French and had a few CLEP credits, my first year I chose an easier language and a more challenging one, taking Italian and Chinese. In my sophomore year, I added Spanish and Russian, and then spent a semester in Italy for the first half of my junior year. I spent the second half of my junior year in China. Essentially, I spent my entire junior year off campus. My senior year, I enrolled in the only French course I could take, an upper-level course, but I found myself a little rusty in the first 2 weeks. We were using a textbook one level lower than the one we used in our senior year of high school. I was doing well, but I couldn't dominate like I used to, and frankly, I wasn't confident. The professor was the let's get everyone involved type, so I approached her and asked for a courtesy. I would turn in any work she wanted and pass the tests, but I didn't want to participate in class discussions for 2 weeks. Then, I explained to her, I would not only participate but possibly dominate, to the detriment of the rest of the class. Apparently, Madame Crate was hard of hearing, because for the next 2 weeks she seemed to go out of her way to ask me questions. This annoyed me terribly, and as a result I remained silent. 2 weeks later, I was summoned to see the Dean of the Faculty of Foreign Languages, who told me of Madame Crate's complaint. Dean Patrick, I said firmly, have you checked my certificate lately? Is there anyone in this school who has a higher grade point average in the course subjects than I do, and who even comes close to the amount of linguistic diversity that I have? Wouldn't it be a shame if this year's honors student dropped out of French because of a professor's harassment and made sure everyone found out about it at the banquet? By this point, I was feeling pretty smug. Without another word, I turned around, walked toward the exit, and literally knocked over my future wife. Tracy Patrick was the dean's daughter, and she was apparently walking through his door with her lunch from the local bistro when I turned around and walked right over her, knocking the bag of food out of her hands and sending her onto her back. I was about 6 feet tall, and this girl was about 5 feet tall, so I could only see the top of her blonde head as I collided with her. At that moment, I didn't yet know she was the dean's daughter. but I felt terribly embarrassed for flattening what seemed to be the sweetest girl I'd seen on campus. She let out a series of swear words in French that made me give up, trying to help her up off the floor. Without even thinking about it, I immediately started apologizing to her in perfect French. We chatted for a while, also in French, after which the dean introduced the girl as his daughter, a marketing graduate. Apparently, seeing a beautiful girl makes it much easier for you to speak French, he said to me in French, with a wide smile on his face. Now take my daughter somewhere nice. Apologize to her properly, and buy me another sandwich on the way back. This lunch was the first of many we were to experience throughout senior year. It's hard to resist a beautiful woman with an hourglass figure in miniature who can hold a conversation 1 minute and then laugh like a 5-year-old when someone tells a silly joke. I proposed to her right before graduation. She accepted my ring and became the happiest person on the planet. We scheduled the wedding for the following spring at her home church near Marist. I got a job in human relations with an international firm based in Washington, D.C., and Tracy immediately found a job in her specialty in our nation's capital. We decided to live near D.C. in Virginia. We were close enough to play in the city when we wanted to, but far enough away to be in our own world when we came home. In our first year of independent living, we did all the usual kid things, including a few wonderful weekends when we barely got out of bed. This woman was practically insatiable in bed. The old saying goes, "Chance favors the prepared mind." My chance came right after our wedding the following spring when I was standing in line at Starbucks on my lunch break. Two young managers ahead of me were talking about how their company needed to hire 2 people who understood the business. Finding someone who spoke Spanish would be easy, but finding someone who spoke Russian would be a challenge, they agreed. I knew I shouldn't have listened, but you can make it easy on yourself and just hire me and not hire a second person, I told them. They both looked at me perplexed, and I repeated twice, once in Spanish and once in Russian. "What are you drinking?" asked the taller of the 2 men, who turned out to be Assistant Vice President Michael Abrams of 529 Orthopedics, a medical device company. The second man turned out to be the company's Director of Payroll, John Hardacre. The 3 of us sat down at a table, and within 30 minutes, they told me about a new position they could create for me at the company and that this opportunity could be the career of a lifetime for me. I told them I needed to talk to my wife about it, and we scheduled an interview for 2 days later. It was hard to turn down a job that would immediately double my solid paycheck. The only downside we saw was the occasional travel, but we both agreed that for that kind of money it was worth it. Moreover, we noted that with proper budgeting, Tracy could be a full-time mom when we had children in a few years. During my 2 years with the company, my role evolved into a combination of translator, business analyst, information specialist, and protector of the realm, as my immediate boss, CEO Ralph Turner, liked to call me. In a loose sense, I became Mr. Turner's right-hand man, his assistant on many projects. Because I was proficient in 6 languages, to which I added Arabic, I was often called upon to participate in high-level negotiations. I was not the official interpreter in these negotiations, but it was my responsibility to make sure that what was being said to Miss Turner was not twisted. It was a kind of covert role, but there were times when I had to go undercover to ensure that the negotiations did not break down. These instances usually resulted in the official 529 interpreter losing his job and the other side sitting at the table in shame. In my 28 years, I was making incredible money and playing an important role in an international company. Tracy stopped working right before the birth of our first son, Joshua, 3 years ago, and 3 months before that she gave me a daughter, Isabel. Tracy was a great mother. She drove the kids to all their sporting events, kept the house in order, became a world-class cook, and volunteered at several nonprofit organizations. She was also a wonderful hostess on those rare occasions when we had guests over. Pregnancy only added about 10 pounds to Tracy's body, as she was also a gym rat, among other things. But those extra pounds seemed to be in all the right places. She had no trouble attracting attention wherever she went, whether she was dressed nicely or in a tracksuit. I had no problem with people staring at her, and she didn't seem to notice the admirers. Even the traveling I sometimes had to do was quite pleasant. Since I was part of the inner circle, I always traveled either business class or first class, and the 529 always put us up in great hotels. Occasionally, a woman would make friendly contact with me in the hotel bar and offer to spend the evening with her, but I always politely declined their advances. I was a one-woman man, although it was a nice compliment for a woman to consider me not a troll. I still had a mop of unruly hair, though I kept it above my shoulders, and my height was 5'11" at 180. I was also a gym rat. From time to time when a woman tried to pick me up, I would ask her about her history, especially the married ones. I even talked to some of them who told me their stories, and most of the time I encouraged them to try to fix things in their marriage. Perhaps some of them called me Dr. Phil in 6 languages. A few years later, we finalized negotiations with a hospital in New York City, and after a great lunch with the 529 team, I went to the hotel bar, which was mostly dimly lit and empty, for a nightcap with a rye glass or two. Although I didn't turn my head to look, I could tell it was a woman who sat down next to me as I could smell her perfume. "Buying an old friend a drink?" she asked in her direct manner, and I immediately knew it was Angela. "Dr. Talarico, I presume?" I asked. "I always will, you remember. As I've told you all these years, it's just easier for me to keep the name, my husband's name." I studied her face in silence, except that she had perhaps seen too much pain and suffering from her patients, or maybe in her own life as reflected in her eyes. Her face was almost exactly as I remembered it. She was dressed for an evening out and looked beautiful. She was still a large woman about 5 to 10 years old, but looked a little slimmer than she had in high school, maybe 140 pounds. I took a quick look around her, and most women wouldn't even realize I had gotten such a good look at everything. But this was Angela. Nothing could get past Angela. "Did I pass the inspection?" she asked in a cocky voice. She blinked, waiting for an answer. Of course, it was Angela. "Yes," I replied cheekily. We both giggled and sighed. I ordered her a Tanqueray and tonic. Having occasionally talked to old friends, I knew she was showing promise as a heart surgeon destined for a very big career. I expected nothing less. I also knew that her career was more important to her than her personal life, and the proof of that was the ring finger of her left hand, despite the slight groove in the skin. "Single so far?" I asked, lifting her left hand and wiggling her fingers. "Yes, he was a good man. He just couldn't stand the fact that it was taking me so long to finish things. I didn't lie to him, just like I didn't lie to you." "No, she didn't lie to me. She told me everything straight." "What about you, Nicholas? Are you transferring to the UN or something? A wife and 17 kids?" I told her about how I got a job in the 529 department and how things were going. Then I pulled out my phone and showed her pictures of Tracy and the kids. She seemed really happy for me. We had a couple drinks each. Then I paid the bartender and said goodnight to her. She leaned over and kissed me gently on the cheek. I reciprocated. We exchanged cell phone numbers, mostly out of courtesy because I knew she would never have time to return my calls. Tracy went back to work part-time when our second child went to middle school. 6 months after our youngest graduated high school and left for college, she returned full-time. She worked in the public relations department of a local college, and she seemed to really enjoy her job. Our home life continued as before, except for a new sense of emptiness. It took us a while to come to terms with it, but one Sunday we took a trip back in time and didn't get out of bed for most of the day. The difference was that this time we were both 46 instead of 20. I have to admit that I slept like a beast that night, and when I went to work the next morning, my muscles ached on more than one occasion. "Hey, Grandpa, forgot your cane?" one of the young guys said to me as I limped to the break room for my first cup of morning coffee. A couple years later, Tracy left the university and took a job with a large financial services company that was moving from New York State to Washington, D.C. Since they were new to the area and she was a veteran, she said, she would have to take an active role in some aspects of the company, including things like managing the company's nonprofit expenses. She told me that she might have to work part-time on some projects, but that it wouldn't affect our home life much. I supported her as best I could and told her to keep at it. I didn't pay much attention to it at first, but about a month after Tracy went to work at the financial firm, she started staying late for an hour or two about twice a week, and a couple times she stayed late around 10-11 p.m. She attributed this to dinners with important clients and/or executives from some of the nonprofit organizations the firm worked with, which made sense given her position. I didn't notice any change in her behavior at home, and she seemed to still be the same loving wife, but every now and then I got the odd feeling that she was trying too hard to be Mrs. Perfect. A few months later, her parents came down from New York to visit. At one point, Tracy and her mother were in the kitchen, and her father and I were in the family room of our house, watching sports and just talking nonstop. How does Tracy like working for Dennis O'Brien? I heard he took over most of the day-to-day work from his father, Chuck, a few years ago. Good for Chuck. He was a couple years younger than me, if memory serves. So he's about 65, Joe Patrick said. Did Tracy know her boss before she started working for him? I asked nonchalantly, trying not to give away my concern. Heh, she never mentioned it. Oh yeah, the O'Briens lived a few blocks from us when the kids were growing up. Tracy and Dennis were together the last 2 years of high school, even being prom queen and king. For a couple minutes, I thought he was going to be my son-in-law, but he broke up with Tracy a few months after leaving for Michigan State. She was very emotional at the time, but you know how it is with kids. I nodded, holding back the rising bile. Tracy and I didn't talk too much about our past love affairs. It didn't concern her, and neither did it concern me. But you'd think she'd mention that her new boss was an old acquaintance. I continued to remain calm, but realized I had to at least reaffirm my trust in my wife. I deftly changed the topic of conversation with Joe, but my brain was suddenly working overtime. I didn't even have time to formulate a plan of action before Tracy and her boss slapped me in the face with their deception, although I'm sure at that moment they didn't even realize what they had done. It was a simple act, played out on local television for all to see. I didn't pay attention to it at first, but the beauty of the internet is that what you see on TV never goes away. What a work colleague thought was a good opportunity to watch a replay of my wife's actions on TV turned out to be the worst day of my life. Dennis O'Brien decided it would be a good PR move to throw a noisy fundraiser for the DC Police Department to raise money for new equipment. They named the campaign Love You Blue, probably taking inspiration from an old theme used by Houston Oilers players when they were coached by Bam Phillips. O'Brien and Tracy have been working on the campaign for some time now, and the company held a press conference to announce it. I didn't see the press conference, but several of my coworkers saw it and came to my office to tell me that my wife, along with her boss, was on the new news. The three of us and they called up the video from the CBS affiliate's website. Tracy spoke first at the podium and then introduced Dennis O'Brien, who walked to the podium, leaned over to Tracy, put his hands on her forearms and nonchalantly smacked her on the lips. Nothing too demonstrative. Shit! I roared, completely shocking my three coworkers. That goddamn slut bastard is sleeping with my goddamn wife. I'm going to kill them both. I jumped up from my chair, but my coworkers had the sense not to let me leave the office despite my threats of physical violence against them. One of them called our security guard and the other called Mr. Turner, and both of them came running. Mr. Turner was like a second father to me, so when he came into my office and told me to calm down and explain what had happened, I took a few deep breaths and hit the play button on the video. Mr. Turner immediately knew what he was seeing. "Holy shit," he muttered. "What?" Tom Emmerman, who was one of three coworkers in the room, asked. What do you guys see that we don't see? Look at the way they kissed, Tom, explained Mr. Turner gently. No, it wasn't demonstrative. Oh, hell, Tom whispered a little audibly. That's exactly the kind of kiss I give my wife in the morning when I leave for work. There was silence in the room, as all six men in the office suddenly thought. I'm gonna have to take the rest of the day off, Mr. Turner, I finally said to break the silence. I understand, Trick. You've got a lot of days ahead of you. Don't do anything stupid, son. Before I left, Mr. Turner gave me the business card of a private investigator the firm sometimes hires to do background checks on potential employees. He's not cheap, but he's the best, and very discreet. I looked like myself as I walked out of the office in a daze. A look of pity appeared on the faces of Mr. Turner and my co-workers. In a few short weeks, I had gone from being the happiest married man in the world to being suspicious and devastated. How much of this was all a hoax? Had she only married me because she couldn't have him? Or maybe there had been others before that. When I walked out of the building, I was literally nauseous. I was angry, hurt, and confused. What had I done wrong to deserve this? On the way home, I called the PI company and made an appointment for the next day. There was no better time than now to rip my heart out. Driving home, I opened my extensive wine cabinet and pulled out a bottle of Jameson's Black Barrel. Tracy arrived around 6, by which time I had managed to drink a third of the bottle of Irish whiskey. She came smiling and cheerful, triumphant after the big fundraiser, but one look from me told her something was wrong. I sat in my favorite lazy boy chair, leaning back, and she came over, leaned over to me, putting her face next to mine, and kissed me gently on the lips, just like she had a few hours earlier with her damn boss. Her goddamn boss. A comfortable, familiar kiss, a kiss that until today had told me she was mine. All mine. Now, apparently, it was just an empty gesture. It took all my self-control to keep from shoving her off my lap and throwing up. Do you want to talk about it? She whispered to me. Do you want to go upstairs and see if I can do it better? No, I'll just sit here and drown my sorrows alone. I don't want to ruin your day, I replied. From the way you walked in, I'd guess today was a big PR success for you. So you didn't notice that? She inquired. It was a great day for us. Let me grab my tablet and show you the video. Maybe later. I have a serious problem to solve. We didn't have anything that night or the next week. On the third night, Tracy made a symbolic gesture of initiation, but that was the end of it. It was then that I realized that my loving wife was holding me back, and had been for some time. We used to initiate about equally, but for the last year or so, if I didn't initiate, I didn't receive. She was constantly responding to my desires to keep me satisfied and unaware that there was a problem. But now that she had a lover, she was more than happy to not have to initiate with me. Not that I doubted it, but after 2 weeks, the private investigator had more than enough evidence to prove that my cheating theory was indeed a fact. He had photographs and videotapes of 5 different encounters, including one showing Tracy leaning over his desk in his office in the middle of the day. Apparently, the recording had been done through the company's internal security system, which meant that Dickhead knew what he was filming, and Tracy, I had to assume, didn't. I didn't bother asking where the investigator had gotten the videotape. I knew we'd never be able to use it in court, but it was another dagger in my heart. Saturday night, I took Tracy out to a nice Italian restaurant with a nice atmosphere. While we ate, I told her that I would be out of town Monday through Friday and would be traveling to New York. I mentioned that since she had been spending a lot of time with Dennis O'Brien lately, maybe she would go to New York with me, and we would turn the trip into a mini vacation to repair the relationship. At this point, Tracy looked up from her plate, but looked more panicked than surprised by my statement. It was as if she was about to say something, but then changed her mind and lowered her eyes back to her plate. I can't just pick up and dump Dennis without warning, she said. Besides the fact that he's charming and knows how to turn on the lights in the morning, I'm not sure he'll be able to run the household without me if I don't get everything ready for him. Yes, I spend a lot of time at the office, Trick, but don't think I'm neglecting you, am I? Yeah, I guess I've gotten closer to Dennis over the years, but you don't have to worry about him. He's my boss, and you're the love of my life. You're the only man I love, and I'd rather be the only woman you love. Given the information I already had, I realized Tracy was rubbing some bullshit in my face. So I just handed it back to her, sporting what I hoped was my best smile. Maybe we should get takeout dessert and eat it in bed tonight, I said. She nodded. Among other things, she whispered back to me. I had loved this woman so much for 24 years, and I knew that even though I was mad as hell at her at the moment, I would always love her in one way or another. We never made it to dessert. Monday morning, restraining myself, I walked out the door and left. I stopped at the grocery store and liquor store to stock up on everything I needed to hide out in one of the scrappiest motels in town for the duration of my intended trip. I knew I wouldn't be seen by anyone who could let Tracy know I was in this part of town. Although I had technically taken a week's vacation, I actually managed to get quite a bit of work done by locking myself away for Monday and Tuesday. Apparently, while I was out of town, the amorous duo went on a rampage, and my private investigator had nothing to report. On Wednesday, however, they both left the office early and showed up a few minutes later at a swanky, somewhat exclusive Irish pub on the north side of town. After dinner, they drove to Dennis's house in separate cars. At least she had the good sense not to entertain him in our marital bed. My PI had alerted me when the gymnastics started, and I knew he was recording too. He made his last call around 2 in the morning, informing me that it looked like she would be spending the night with Mr. Wonderful. I set my alarm for 5, and by 7 I was already standing in the middle of Dennis O'Brien's driveway, since he'd apparently asked Tracy to pull into the vacant space in his garage. I was halfway through the morning paper and a second donut when the garage door swung open at 7:30. I guess I could have been a complete idiot, but I honked when Tracy started backing up, not expecting anyone in the driveway. She braked sharply and I saw Dennis slowly climb out of the front seat of his car. I watched them from the front seat of my car. Tracy's eyes went to her forehead when she saw me get out of the car and into the driveway. "Tell me again that I'm the only one you love," I shouted to her. Asswipe didn't look happy as he approached, but then he made the biggest mistake of his life when he told me I couldn't talk to my wife like that. I pounced on him, dropped my shoulder moments before contact, and then picked him up and without stopping on my feet, flopped him on his back and ended up on top myself with a perfect takedown. I'm sure I heard his ribs crunch before he made a loud oomph sound. I growled, pulling away from his prostrate body. Tracy looked at me like I was crazy, and then ran up to Dennis as I slowly walked to my car. "Call 911 and don't move him too much so the broken rib doesn't puncture a lung," I growled to my soon-to-be ex-wife. I could see her mouth moving, but no sound came out of it. Her lover was making a multitude of noises, occasionally whimpering. I got in my car and drove back to the apartment I was staying in. The police showed up at my apartment about an hour later, handcuffed me, and took me to jail for assault on an idiot. Apparently, O'Brien wasn't too pleased with the pain his broken rib was causing him. I used my one phone call, not to alert my lawyer, but to call a reporter I knew from the biggest newspaper in town. He found my arrest interesting, and within 2 hours of my call, I was a free man again. Ha! Who would have thought it? An hour after I got back to my apartment, Tracy showed up at my door. "We need to talk, Trick," she said, with the biggest understatement I'd heard in years. I opened the door all the way and gestured for her to come in. "Why? Just tell me why," I whispered. "I'm not really sure. I still love you, Trick, I really do. It's just that Dennis and I had a history and—" "So you still love him even after all these years with me?" I cried. "Did you ever really love me? Was I just a poor substitute for him? What about the kids? You just couldn't keep your legs shut, could you?" Emotions ranging from rage to bewilderment raced through my brain. She would never know how close I came to punching her in the face at that moment. She looked at me with pity in her eyes. I knew it was over between us, and I knew that one broken rib wasn't enough for this asshole. I'll take care of the filing. Get yourself a lawyer and we can at least act like adults, I said. Also, make sure that asshole doesn't cross me. I won't be so nice next time. Our week-long presentation in New York was a huge success. And on Saturday night, 529 Orthopedics threw a raucous party in the upstairs party room of our hotel. All the decent doctors from all the hospitals in town, a bunch of hospital administrators, and the upper echelon of 529 were in attendance. I was wondering what one of the most famous cardiac surgeons in the city was doing here when she walked in. Heads turned as Dr. Angela Tallarico entered the room, dressed to kill, wearing a black coat. I tensed as I saw her look around, spot me, and head purposefully in my direction. I suppose it could have had something to do with the fact that I hadn't been out much since my divorce 4 years ago, or it could have been the fact that it was Angela. I was talking to a small group when I spotted her, quickly apologized and headed straight for her. I gave her a wry smile and then we hugged. There was a strange silence in the room. Bella. Beautiful, I whispered in Italian, knowing she remembered the language she had learned in school. She gave me a 10,000-watt smile. Suddenly I noticed that there was a lively conversation going on throughout the room. I hope you don't mind me intruding on your orthopedic party, Nicholas, she said coquettishly. Never, I replied. I'm so glad you stopped by. I directed her to the bar where I brought each of us a Tanqueray cocktail and tonic. At my request, she told me about the life of one of New York's top heart surgeons. I noticed she still hadn't put on her wedding ring. Tell me, is Mr. Tallarico still out of it? I asked finally. She hesitated. She cleared her throat. She looked guilty. I don't have time for Mr. Tallarico. If that's what I wanted, which I don't think it is, she said. I've had a few boyfriends since my divorce, but nothing serious. You know what I'm like. Unfortunately, I do. You always let him take over. When are you gonna let your heart take over? I already did that once, remember? It didn't end too well for me. Wrong guy. Stuff happens, get over it, I said. Just like with my wife, although I have to admit that 24 years is a lot more than my 6. I gave her an angry look for a second, wondering how she even knew about my divorce, but then I realized it was about Angela. We'd always been brutally honest with each other. Well, almost always. She studied my face for a long moment. I looked deeply into her eyes and was sure I saw what I was looking for. You look beautiful, I said as we sipped our drinks. You walked in very spectacularly. I'm sure I did. Dr. Angela Tallarico always looks very spectacular. Right now, there are at least a dozen doctors and administrators wondering what the hell I'm doing here. I'm glad you're here. Let me introduce you to someone I think is important. With Angela in my arms, I walked around the room until I found Ralph Turner. He was one of the few people I told about Angela. So, this is the lovely Dr. Angela Tallarico. I am honored, Mr. Turner said in his most courteous manner. Angela blushed. This didn't happen to her very often. Somehow, she realized what he meant to me. It turned into a wonderful evening. And then it turned into a wonderful night. Angela didn't hesitate when I suggested we go to our room after the party. What happened next, I think, is obvious. Later that morning, I sent her home in the cab while myself and my 529 team headed to the airport. The flight home was short, but it was enough time for Mr. Turner to sit down next to me and ask how I could let Angela go. For a terribly smart guy trick, you're just dumb, he said. Marry that woman. Marry her soon. Marry her tomorrow. You know I'm right. He looked me straight in the eye, stood up, and went back to his seat. I knew he was right. The question was, would I ever be able to convince Angela of that? 2 weeks later, I stood on the doorstep of the house owned by Pasquale, Pat, and Lorraine Tallarico, Angela's parents. I had never been formally introduced to them, though I had always known of them. I knew they were incredibly important to Angela and who she became. They were tough leaders, and I knew that they were the ones pushing Angela to be as great as she could be. I also remembered Angela saying that I didn't impress them. That was decades ago, and I had hoped I could use them as allies in trying to win their daughter's love and devotion. Angela's heart was a prize worth winning, and in my 50s I was willing to do anything. I had already given up the task once, but not a second time. I spent Friday evening and Saturday afternoon talking to Angela's parents, explaining how I felt about their daughter and why I believed I could make her happy for the rest of our lives. I talked about everything, even my marriage and divorce from Tracy. I know I surprised her parents when we talked about finances, since I was making about 5 times as much as the esteemed Dr. Talarico, just for speaking multiple languages. Her father asked. Her father asked. Only for speaking multiple languages with a bunch of CEOs around the world, in a field that is only going to grow, I replied confidently, but modestly, as I had hoped. We then moved on to a more difficult topic, cracking a nut, which turned out to be their daughter. If you know her well, you know that she is very energetic and very dedicated to her patients. How do you get her to think of herself first? Her father asked. Her father asked. Her father asked. That's going to be my problem. Just assure me you're on my side, I said. Angela's mother jumped up from the chair she was sitting in and practically smothered me in a hug. While I was trying to catch my breath, Pat grabbed my hand and wished me happy fate. I figured that meant I had their blessing. 2 weeks before the wedding, I made a date with Angela and planned a long weekend with Ralph. I dressed her up to the highest standards and showed up at Angela's house on Friday night with a corsage around my wrist. I walked her to the rented limousine, and we headed to East Meadow on Long Island to Borelli's, my favorite Italian restaurant. Borelli's was still an old-fashioned enough restaurant that I could ask for an Italian-speaking waiter, and he had to speak only Italian at our table all evening. Being Italian and having studied the language in school, Angela could speak and understand some of what was said, but the waiter and I were moving too fast for her to keep up, so I was ordering for her, and generally being the go-between. We didn't even hold back when the manager came out and greeted me in Italian like I was his long-lost brother. After that, we drove back to the city where I had a reservation at one of the upscale dance clubs. As soon as we entered the club, it came to her that she was blushing. "It's prom night, isn't it?" she exclaimed. "Prom night is for losers," I replied. "Remember, some of us were too busy going to the movies to make it to prom." We laughed like a couple of idiots and then went dancing the night away. When we pulled up to her house around 2 in the morning, I walked her to the door and then very formally told her I had a great time. "Why don't you send the limo home for the night?" She wheezed. She didn't need to be told twice. After a few dozen minutes, I asked, "Ange," no one ever called her Angie or justified it, "have you ever thought about how you want to spend your retirement years?" "Honestly, no, Nicholas," she replied. "I've got some good years ahead of me, so no, I haven't thought about it. Besides, you know, I'm not very good at multitasking. I was hoping for something better. Damn, I'm not persistent after all." "Okay, but we still need to get moving. Graduation weekend is far from over," I said. "Are you sure you want to go through with this?" She asked. "Oh yes, we still have a long way to go, lady," I replied. I grabbed my bag of clothes, and the next day we followed the usual pattern. Lunch, shopping, dinner, then a Broadway play, followed by drinks at another nice restaurant. We spent the night in my hotel room doing the same things we had done the night before, but went to bed a little earlier this time because I told her I had a special breakfast planned on the island. We were both a little tired when we got up at 7. At 8, we were already sitting in my rental car and driving down the Long Island Expressway, which was pretty empty on a Sunday. As I turned off the LIE and headed towards Comac, an amused expression appeared on Angela's face as she realized what was up. Her parents were waiting for us on the front porch when we pulled up. Her parents greeted me like I was a long-lost son, but I whispered to her mother that Angela wasn't thrilled about the marriage as we hugged. She was surprised, but told me to hang in there. For her part, Angela looked shocked at the way her parents greeted me. We started with fresh pastries that I had asked her parents to buy from a local bakery, but after that, Angela's mom took over all the culinary delights. We ate like kings, and the conversation revolved around Angela and her childhood. There was a lot of laughter around the table. We finished our steaming mimosas, and it wasn't until she'd finished her flute that she discovered there was something stuck in the bottom of the flute. That's where I'd stuck the 3-carat yellow gold engagement ring that Tiffany & Co. had made especially for me. "Nicholas, no, you didn't," she whispered hoarsely, bursting into tears. I can't accept it." "You can accept it," her mother said in a scolding tone, then smiled broadly. "It's time for Dr. Tallarico to become Dr. Tallarico Trin. Trick!" Ah, hell, never mind. "Angela, I'm not trying to take away from what you've done to get where you are, but there's more to life than just work. Look at your parents. They've been married for 50 years and they still look like they love each other very much. Don't you love the time we spend together? I do. And I want to wake up with you every morning and know that we'll be together every day." And then the unthinkable happened. Angela started crying and then sobbing. I hugged her, and when her mother held out the dried ring to me, I gently pushed her away and then put it on her finger. She looked at her hand as if she had never seen her fingers before. With Mr. Turner's approval, I changed my 529 fund status to advisor and moved out of New York. Angela and I bought a nice house in the country, and a year later we were married. My children were happy for me, although both thought Angela was a bit prim. Admittedly, Angela was reserved with my children. She had no children of her own, and I knew that in those days having children was not her style. But when my children had children of their own, restraint became a thing of the past. She may not have wanted to be a mother, but her grandmother's genes were huge. Ridiculous would be more accurate. It gave her a huge advantage over her children, and they were able to bond strongly. Grandchildren were the only reason we dated my ex and husband number 2, Dennis. We were never the best of friends, but we managed to be civil, especially around children and grandchildren. Dennis is still a little mad at me as he never forgave me for breaking his rib, but he should have known I could have done more and really messed up his life. He definitely deserved it. Waking up next to Angela every morning is a pleasure. Our life together is good, although sometimes she still gets a little carried away with her work. It's understandable given what she does, but at times like that I give her a day or two of respite and then bring her back. She always apologizes for snapping, and we usually spend the whole weekend in bed, although in our 50s we don't do it like 20-year-olds anymore. Most of that time we just lie in bed, cuddled up and chat about everything and nothing. We are best friends, lovers, spouses. We both plan to retire at 60 and travel the world a lot. Maybe I should learn a 7th language. The end. Thanks for watching, hope you enjoyed. Subscribe to my channel and watch the next video.